And good evening. Thank you very much for coming along. It's great to see everyone. And welcome to this session of Lockdown Learnings. Tonight we've got a really special session, very much community focused this time. We know from speaking to you over many years that there are certain commonalities among the FlexCareers community, one of which being that many of you, 78% of you, we believe, are parents and are facing a lot of challenges that you haven't faced before in this crazy period we're calling COVID. So I suppose what we'd like to do today is welcoming obviously Susie Mogg, who is a pioneer in this space of, I suppose, well, her business is called Resilience in Kids, but really teaching kids how to be resilient in these crazy times. I have seen Susie in action in the past. She actually delivered a talk to the parents at my kids' school about 2 months back, and so that's how we came across her. And so I'm really looking forward to learning, to listening to what Susie has to say, and to learning exactly what this whole topic is all about, resilience, where it meets parents, and it's really just some hacks for navigating this crazy period as a parent. So at this point, I'm really going to hand over to Susie. Welcome her to the FlexCareers community, and yeah, Susie, tell us what to start with. Yeah, welcome.
Thanks so much, Joel. So welcome to our webinar on building working parents' resilience, both during COVID, but also for the long term. So as Joel said, the webinar is being run in partnership with FlexCareers. So I'd like to thank Joel for the opportunity to speak with you all this evening about this important topic. As Joel said, my name is Susie Mogg, and I'm the founder of a business called Resilience in Kids. But don't be put off by the kids branding. We do obviously work with kids, but we also work with parents, with childcare workers, with teachers, sports coaches, and organisations, so employees and leaders as well. I've devoted the recent years of my career to researching resilience, and prior to this I spent 20 years working in people and culture roles in large corporates, both here in Sydney and in London. Probably can detect a bit of a British accent there. So I work full time, and I've got 2 primary school aged kids of my own, so you can guarantee that whatever you're experiencing, I'm experiencing too. So there will be time for questions, but I'll focus on those at the end of the session. So please submit these during the presentation using the chat function or the Q&A function, and I'll come to those, as I say, at the end. We've got an hour together this evening, so we'll be wrapped up by 9, and the webinar is being recorded. So as Joel said, and as you would all very much be aware, we're all living through exceptionally uncertain and unsettling times. And whilst there is now light at the end of the tunnel, which is really great and quite reassuring, no one quite knows when things will return to normal and what this new normal will look like. And for many of us, I think the light that's appearing at the end of the tunnel is actually proving to be a bit of a shock to the system. I know I've been talking to many parents this week, and they've been telling me that they're not sure they feel quite ready to start reintegrating with society yet. They sort of feel like they've been thrown from, you know, 1 day a week to suddenly full time back at school, back into their busy lives, you know, driving kids to soccer practice and goodness knows what else. And that things are kind of busier and more complex than they were before because the rules are being rewritten every day. Although there are a fair few, of course, who are just overjoyed that their kids are back at school and that they can finally get some work done with no interruptions. But I think what makes what we're living through even more difficult is the fact that we'd only just started to process the impact of the drought and the horror of the bushfires to then be faced with a global pandemic. It feels like there's only so much we can cope with. And it's not as if the personal challenges that we were all experiencing when COVID suddenly arrived, it's not as if they all just disappeared. The separations we were going through, the elderly parents we were caring for, the anxiety and depression we were struggling with, whatever it was we had going on for us, they were all still there. And in many cases, they were actually exacerbated by the crisis. So navigating this on our own is one thing, but add into the mix kids and work, and suddenly things become a whole lot more complex. When it comes to our children, I think many of us are worried about how they're coping. We're worried about the return to school and how that's been going for them this week if they've gone back to school. We're wondering if they fell behind when they were learning from home, and if they did, how they'll catch up. And I guess we're wondering longer term whether their mental well-being is being affected by COVID. And like us, it isn't as if the issues they were experiencing when COVID arrived suddenly disappeared. Their anxiety, friendship difficulties, low self-worth are all still there, and in many cases they've also been exacerbated by the crisis. When it comes to our work, many of us are worried about how we'll make the return to work. We're worried about how we'll get to and from work on public transport, how to avoid getting sick, and how to navigate all the workplace changes that are coming our way. Or maybe we lead businesses or teams and are worried about how we'll bring our teams on the journey with us, deliver tough messages in a difficult economic climate, and steer our businesses through one of the most challenging economic times in recent history. Some of us lost our jobs because of COVID. Others were already out of work. There's real fear about finding new work when the market is so flooded. And I think some of us who do have a job are worried about how long we'll have it for. We're concerned we might lose our job when JobKeeper ends in September, or that we might have to take a pay cut or reduce our hours. And some of us work in businesses that are thriving due to COVID, which is great. Maybe we work for Woolies, for Coles, medical supply companies, maybe we manufacture office furniture. And we're just looking for ways that we can continue to thrive in the workplace and handle some of the more typical challenges that come up, including difficult work relationships, office politics, how to be more assertive. So all of us are truly living through, if any of us have been on those development programs where they talk about the VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous, this is just a perfect example of a VUCA time. And the impact of all of this on our mental well-being can be significant. But there is some really good news. And that is that whilst many of us have no control or influence over what's happening, we do have control and influence over how we respond. And this is what I'd like to speak with you about this evening. So before we get stuck in, I'd like to just give you a bit of a crash course on resilience. It's a bit of a buzzword, and it's a word that's often misunderstood. So at Resilience in Kids, we define resilience as responding with confidence to challenges. So these challenges can be big, such as COVID or job loss, or they can be small. So, I don't know, a minor road rage incident at the traffic lights, or maybe your teenager missed the deadline for one of their assignments. Resilience is relative, so two people might respond differently to the same challenge. It also changes over time. Just because we've responded resiliently once to a situation, it doesn't mean we will do again. It's also something many of us are better at in certain contexts. So some might be resilient at work, but less so in our personal lives, and vice versa. And the process of building resilience over our lifetimes is complex, but what's really exciting is that resilience has now been codified and broken down into a set of skills that can be taught. So anyone can learn to be more resilient. Doesn't matter if they're 2 or 92. And that's really the space that we play in at Resilience in Kids. Now, you may hear people talk about bouncing back. When they talk about resilience, we like to take things a step further and talk about bouncing forward. And this is a term coined by Sheryl Sandberg in a book she wrote after the tragic passing of her late husband called Option B. And in the follow-up email that we will be sending, I do include a link to this book so you can read it. But in here, it suggests that we can become even stronger as a result of the challenges that we experience and use them as a step towards reaching our potential, which I just think is so positive. Now, for those who are more statistically minded, there are plenty of stats out there as to why we should be focusing on this. So when it comes to our kids, Beyond Blue states that half of all the mental health conditions we experience at some point in our lives will have started by age 14. I find that really quite confronting. 14 is so young. And over 75% of mental health problems occur before the age of 25. And when it comes to us, there was a recent AFR article that stated that an individual's IQ declines by 30% when they are stressed. And Beyond Blue also states that 1 in 5 Aussie men will experience an anxiety condition in their lifetime, and at least 1 in 7 women report experiencing an anxiety-related condition. And I think 1 in 5 Australians have taken time off work in the past 12 months because they felt stressed or anxious, depressed, or mentally unhealthy. So resilience in working parents and their children is a massive topic, and it isn't going to be possible for us to cover everything today, but what I'd like to do is to focus on 3 really key areas: stress and overwhelm, taking control, and fear, worry, and anxiousness or anxiety. I'm going to be focusing on you as working parents in this session, but everything I talk to is equally relevant to your kids. It's also as relevant to COVID as it is to any challenges that come up for you now and in the future. I'll go into as much detail as time allows, but if you enjoy this webinar, we will be running a series of follow-up fortnightly webinars, again in partnership with FlexCareers for working parents, where I'll be going into a lot more detail into how we can build our own and our children's resilience, and the Flex team have put a link in the chat function to the booking page for this, so do feel free to click on that and reserve a spot at one of those webinars, one or more of those webinars. So stress and overwhelm. So whatever our personal experience right now, it's likely that many of us are feeling stressed and overwhelmed, or if we've not, that we have been up until the kids went back to school. Either way, it's normal to feel stressed and overwhelmed when adversity hits. And if we're not feeling it now, we most likely will be when adversity next comes our way. And let's face it, it will do. Adversity is just something that happens to everybody in life. Now, what this looks and feels like for each and every one of us will likely differ. So some might have difficulty sleeping, some might be experiencing panic attacks. I don't know, some might lack focus, whereas some might be more irritable or maybe snappier with their loved ones. What causes the stress and overwhelm will also differ. For some, it will be environmental, so maybe the fact that you've lost your job, whereas others it might be due to unhelpful thought patterns or anxiety and depression. Now, the first thing that I would suggest when feeling this way is to make sure that you're okay. Now, self-care is important at the best of times, but it is critical at a time like this. Now, self-care doesn't have to mean heart-shaped candles, beautiful cupcakes, luxurious bubble baths, although it can, of course, mean all of those things. I tend to get a bit of an eye roll when I say, we need to practice self-care. Basically means doing what you need to do to make sure that you're okay. So eating healthily, getting enough exercise, and sleeping well are really non-negotiable. Now, sleeping well is key. Now, the Sleep Foundation, and again, I'll send a link out to this afterwards, has got some great information about how much sleep we need, why some of us don't get enough, the implications of a lack of sleep, and tips on how to get more, including advice on, it's a really comprehensive website. They've got advice on mattresses, pillows, tech use, shift working, keeping a regular bedtime, the importance of winding down, and lots more. So do check it out if you think sleep might be a problem for you. It says that if we don't get enough sleep, it can lead to a lack of focus, can give us puffy eyes, make us want to eat more, and it can affect our immune system, make it more likely that we'll catch a cold or something else. Now, once you've nailed the basics, it's really up to you. So you might want to connect by phone with a good friend, you might want to go for a walk in nature or pick up a new hobby. Any or all of the above are great, provided you've got the basics in place. And look, this is something really important to talk to kids about, to talk to them in your everyday conversations. A really lovely activity to do with them or to invite them to do on their own is to create a self-care box or a picture where they can describe all the things that they can do to look after themselves. They can put it in their room or put it up on their bedroom wall, and as soon as the going starts to get tough, you can gently suggest that they have a look at their box or their picture and pick something and put it into practice. And for those of you with tweens or teens who experience sleep difficulties, there's another great website which I've included a link to called the Sleep Shack. It's got a great program and some associated research and resources that you might find helpful. Now, a critical part of self-care is self-compassion, and this really is what it says on the tin, treating ourselves with compassion. Now, many people are resistant to the idea of self-compassion, seeing it as a form of self-pity or self-indulgence. Far from it, this is science. It really does work. The most significant and consistent research findings are that people who are more self-compassionate tend to be less anxious and depressed. They also tend to experience fewer negative emotions. These are still experienced, they're just observed and not bought into. They also tend to be more emotionally intelligent. This is pretty compelling stuff. Now, Dr. Kristin Neff has done a lot of work in this space, and she talks about doing three things, and they're up on your screen now. The first is we need to be kind to ourselves. The second is we need to recognize we're not alone in our experience, and the third is that we need to practice mindfulness. So the first one here is really about that sense that I think many of us regularly say things to ourselves that we would never say to our friends. And it's really our inner voice who says these things to us. So our inner voice is automatic, it's silent, and sometimes it can just chatter away without us noticing that actually it's being really harsh and really critical and judgmental. And there's a beautiful quote by T.S. Eliot which sums this up well. What is this self inside us, this silent observer, severe and speechless critic who can terrorize us and urge us on to futile activity, and in the end, judge us still more severely, or to the errors into which his own reproaches drove us? So being kind to ourselves is about noticing when we're being unkind to ourselves and overriding that inner voice and speaking to ourselves in the same way that we would a friend. So the second thing that she talks about is this need to recognize that we're not alone in what we're experiencing. And it can be incredibly powerful to think about all the working parents around the world who are going through exactly what we're going through right now. And I think this is the first time that I can remember truly being able to say this, literally every working parent. And when we do this, when we think in this way, it really helps create a sense of connection, a sense that we belong, and this stops us feeling isolated and disconnected. So the third thing she talks about is mindfulness. And as with resilience, there's a lot of buzz about mindfulness. It's a term that's often overused and misunderstood. And oftentimes I get the whole, I just don't have time to take out of my day to spend 15 minutes, sitting doing mindfulness. So what is it to start with? So mindfulness is about noticing what's happening for us right now in the present moment, whatever that looks like for us. And it's about doing that non-judgmentally. So noticing our feelings, our thoughts, our bodily sensations, whatever's going on for us without judging them as being good or bad. So she talks about us needing to see things as they really are in order to be able to respond compassionately to them. And this isn't easy to do. Most of us don't like suffering and do whatever we can to avoid it. Maybe we just keep extra busy, maybe we just stand scrolling through our Facebook feed, pick up our phone, do whatever we can on there, or maybe we numb in other ways. But the idea is that if we don't show compassion to ourselves in the moment, whatever it is we're experiencing will go unattended to and we'll start feeling more stressed and overwhelmed. A key part of this whole mindfulness self-compassion thing is avoiding spending too much time in the past, ruminating over the conversation you had with your boss or how you missed your child's parent-teacher meeting because you forgot to put it in your diary, but also to avoid spending too much time in the future, worrying about what this might look like. And this is particularly important for those of you experiencing job insecurity at the moment. All you really have right now is what's happening in the present moment. And you can see how this starts to come full circle and how being mindful can help you notice when your inner voice is saying unkind things to you. And the real beauty of mindfulness is that it allows you to choose what you'll focus on. So you might notice a thought and decide that actually it's an incorrect and unhelpful thought, and you might choose to let it go. Mindfulness allows you to respond rather than to react. And you can probably start to see how this can benefit you as you engage with your kids. So your child has a tantrum or is acting up. Do you react to that by yelling at them to stop, or do you pause, take a deep breath, and then pull them tight into a hug because you've realized that there's a big emotion sitting behind their behavior that needs to be attended to? Now, John Kabat-Zinn has done a lot of work in this space. He's written some excellent books that you can access after this webinar. Now, the practice of mindfulness originated in Buddhism, but he pioneered non-religious mindfulness, and he encapsulates the essence of the practice with this quote: "You can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf." And you can easily teach self-compassion to your children. So maybe you notice that your son's being hard on himself. You can encourage him to be kind to himself. Maybe your daughter's struggling with her schoolwork. You can remind her that she's not alone in struggling to deal with something difficult. Maybe your nephew is stressed and worried about returning to soccer practice. Gently bring him out of his imagination and into the present moment. And there are some great apps that you can download if you do want to incorporate a mindfulness practice into your everyday routine. So Smiling Mind is a really great app for children. Headspace is great for older kids, tweens, teens. And I really like the Calm app, or the UCLA website actually has some really great meditations on there as well, as does Dr. Kristen Neff's website. And I'll include a link to all of this in the follow-up email. And there's a great book of meditations you can read your primary school aged kids called Nightlights. And again, I'll include the details of this in my follow-up email. Now, stress and overwhelm, a really great way of managing this is to practice deep breathing. And again, this isn't airy-fairy fluffy stuff. This is science. It works. Deep breathing is so powerful because when we take a deep breath, it sends a message to our brain to calm down and to relax. The brain then sends this message to our body. It increases the supply of oxygen to your brain, and it stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system, which makes us feel calm. It also makes us feel more connected to our body, which brings our awareness away from whatever it is that's making us feel so stressed. And the beauty of deep breathing is that it can be done anywhere, and no one needs to know you're doing it. And to be most effective, deep breaths need to come right from the pit of your stomach. And it's a really powerful to use with you, a really powerful tool to use with your kids when you see that they're stressed. It can really be as simple as just inviting them to take 3 deep breaths when you see them losing their cool. You can make the practice of learning to do deep breathing quite fun with them. Hold on a sec. When we do work with groups of kids, we often get them to lie down and to put their favourite toy or a ball on the pit of their stomach and to practice breathing up and down. And if they see the ball or their toy roll off, then that's great. They've got their stomach to rise highly enough. You just want to avoid them putting it up on their chest because that's where you do the shallow breathing. And another really great technique for managing stress and overwhelm is something called progressive muscle relaxation. And again, it's really simple. And once you've figured out how to do it, you can do it anywhere without anyone noticing. Just like deep breathing, it's another really great one to teach your children. And it really involves just tensing and then relaxing all of the major muscle groups in your body, starting with your head and ending with your feet. And you need to tense them first, as this allows you to relax them more fully. And there's research that shows that relaxing our body physically can relieve us of all sorts of psychological stress. It's good initially as you get familiar with the practice to set aside some dedicated time to do this. So make yourself comfortable, ideally in a position that won't lead to you falling asleep, and then work through each muscle group from your head downwards. So that's stress and overwhelm. There's a lot more in that, but hopefully that gives you a fairly good picture of what you can do when adversity hits and you're in freak out mode. Once you've got yourself feeling calm, a really important thing to start trying to do is to take control. And this means coming up with a plan. This will make you feel so much better. Now, what this looks like for each of us will differ, as will the process we need to go through to create this plan. But whatever plan you come up with, setting some SMART goals is really important. Goal setting is key to building resilience. Now, many of you will be familiar with SMART. So this stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. And again, this isn't just about us, this is about our kids too, encouraging them to set goals when they're experiencing adversity, but even not, just for the school holidays maybe, or they could set some goals for the beginning of the beginning of the term. But goal setting really gives us a sense of purpose. And when we have purpose, we feel motivated. This gives us meaning. And then when we achieve whatever goal it is we've set for ourselves, it boosts our confidence. Now, confidence is key to resilience. When we feel confident, we're more likely to respond resiliently to the challenges that come our way. And the opposite is also true. So when we respond with resilience to challenges, we're more likely to feel confident. It also gives us a sense of agency. Now, agency is defined as our capacity to influence. And when we set and achieve personal goals, we feel like we've influenced our own lives. And this can make us feel really in control, positive, and optimistic. It also helps us feel really focused and holds us to account. Now, this is not intended to be a life coaching session, far from it. But for some of us, coming up with a plan can involve going right back to the basics and doing a really comprehensive analysis of our values and our strengths, what these are, and how much time we spend on them. And getting this right can help ensure that we find purpose and meaning from what we do, which in itself is hugely resilience building. Now, there's a great online survey you can do called the VIA Character Strengths Survey. And again, I'll send you a link to it after this event. And you can use this to work out what your unique strengths are. Now, research shows that finding purpose and meaning from what we do can lead to positive health outcomes, and it can make us feel a lot happier. Now, Martin Seligman, you may have heard of him. He's effectively the founder of the positive psychology movement. He's done a lot of research into meaning, and in the research that he did into happiness, he identified 3 dimensions of happiness that we can all strive to achieve. Now, the first he calls the pleasant life, and this is achieved when we have and when we can appreciate companionship, the natural environment, and our sort of basic bodily needs. The second is the good life, and this is achieved when we have and when we can identify our values and strengths and use them creatively to improve our lives. And the third, and this is where all of this sort of values and strengths-based work comes in, the third is a meaningful life. And this is achieved when we can use our unique values and strengths for a purpose that's greater than ourselves. Now, of course, any such analysis always needs to take place against the backdrop of what your unique context is. So you might be sitting there going, well, that's all great. I'm really good at art. I create beautiful mosaics in my shed on the weekend with the kids, and my family values are right up there, and I don't feel I spend enough time on any of that. But you know what? I'm a single parent and I need to work full time and support 3 kids, meaning that being an artist just isn't viable. Of course, absolutely. So maybe that's something you need to keep as a hobby or a side hustle, but there's still no harm if you have the space and the time to take a step back if you can, and reflect upon your strengths and your values. And remember, there's a difference between something you're skilled at and a strength. So oftentimes in the workplace we'll be told, oh, you're so great at doing that, which means that you're skilled at it. But a skill is something you're good at, but that you don't necessarily love. Strengths are things that you're good at and that you love doing as well. So for others, our plans just need to be much more tactical. You maybe don't need to go into all of that sort of strengths and values-based work. So if you're maybe someone who's worried about finding a new job, your plan might involve broadening your network, connecting with some agencies. You might want to think laterally about other roles you can use your skill set in, or maybe think creatively about some other options for paid work. So the side hustle we were just talking about could be an option. If you're someone who's worried about losing your job when JobKeeper comes to an end, come up with a plan B, broaden your network, think about what lateral moves you could make within your organisation, update your resume, while at the same time going above and beyond to make yourself indispensable. And whatever your situation, being self-reflective and open and receptive to feedback and learning, I think, is really key. This is a time to be thinking about your skill set and whether you can strengthen this in any way. And look, there are many skills that we all need to navigate the future of work, which it feels like we're accelerating much more quickly towards because of COVID, and resilience is right up there. Now, I mentioned that resilience has been codified, we have developed a framework that defines what a resilient employee or a resilient leader looks like. I'm not going to go through this in a lot of detail, but it's just up on your screen now. So you can see here that you know what some of the headings are here. So you've got practices self-care, open and receptive to learning and growth, you know, mentally agile, shows empathy, chooses positivity. I'm not going to read all of them for you. They're all up there. This will be sent out afterwards. So I wanted to show you that it exists and prompt you to have a read of it afterwards, because it's a really good thing to look at and just do some self-reflection as to how do I sit against each of these, and is there something that I can be working on now? Now, you can also come up with a plan for how you support your kids and build their resilience. There's a lot involved in building your children's resilience, and how you best do this, whether it's during COVID or whether it's for the long term, will really depend on what's going on for them, their unique makeup, their family context, their cultural background, the school they go to, and way more. There is no silver bullet or one-size-fits-all solution. And we'll talk to a range of the things that you can do in our upcoming resilience series. But one of the things that you can do to build their resilience, and it's probably one of the top things, you know, when people say to me, you know, if you were just to, you know, tell me the top 3 things I can do to build my kids' resilience, what would you say? Connection would be absolutely up there. And at Resilience in Kids, we say that connection is your parenting superpower, which is great. We all love a nice superpower. And Dr. Brene Brown, who does the most awesome work, she's got a great definition of connection. She defines connection as the energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued, when they can give and receive without judgment, and when they derive sustenance and strength from the relationship. Now, we're all born with a need to connect. This stimulates brain growth, personality development, and a child's ability to form relationships, and it develops throughout a child's life. Connection is a fundamental need, and it's part of being human. Now, if we're willing to take the time each day to make meaningful connections, our kids will be more willing to learn from us and more able to use their best judgment when making decisions, which effectively is what we want from our kids, right? We want to help them grow and develop such that they can use their best judgment. What is life if it's not a series of decisions? And we can view these connections as deposits into their emotional bank account. I'm sure many of us who've been navigating working from home whilst the kids have been home over the past couple of months have been making quite a few withdrawals from that emotional bank account. Those small micro moments of connection are all of those important deposits that you're feeding back in. And there are plenty of opportunities for us to connect with our kids. I'm not talking about having to spend, you know, hours on big long bike rides or, you know, hours making the most amazing Lego structures, although of course all of that is absolutely amazing. You know, when we're cooking, when we're getting ready for school or for bed, when we're matching socks in the laundry or taking a ride in the car, whatever it is, these can be moments of connection or moments of disconnection. They really don't have to take a long time. Now, to truly connect, we need to be fully present. So again, we're going full circle here with some of the mindfulness work we talked about earlier with self-compassion. So this means putting your phone away, trying to stop multitasking and focusing solely on them. It's about making sure, as Dr. Brene Brown says, that they feel seen, heard, and valued. So this means listening to them, watching their body language, noticing what they do or say, loving them unconditionally, and fully accepting them for who they are. Now, I showed a slide just now showing what a resilient worker looks like. I also have one showing what a resilient child looks like. And again, I'm not going to go through this in a lot of detail, but it can be quite interesting having a look at this and kind of thinking, well, where are my kids at? Do they typically persevere, or maybe do they give up? It just kind of gives a language and just a framework to what we're trying to develop in our kids. So feel free to have a look at this when the follow-up email is sent out. And I will move on to the next topic in a sec, but many parents are asking whether the pandemic is going to have a lasting impact on their kids' well-being. So I thought I would just tackle that subject head on. And really, the jury is out to a large extent. I mean, the situation is still unfolding, right? Just in South Korea today, they're talking about, you know, reinstating lockdown. Hopefully we won't reach that stage here in Australia, but there's so much of this story that still needs to be written. But I was reading an article from UC Berkeley recently, and it drew upon children's experiences of previous large-scale societal challenges. So it drew upon their experiences of 9/11, of Second World War, of, you know, other wars that have happened in between. And it kind of came to a number of conclusions, which it then applied to the pandemic. And it suggested that children who experience the pandemic close up are probably likely to be more heavily affected than those who don't, which I guess seems pretty intuitive. So if you've got a child, maybe who's got a family member who was quite seriously affected by COVID, then they're going to be more affected than others. Children are less likely to be affected if they're not exposed to too much information about what's happening. So, for example, in the form of the news. And so younger kids probably don't need to watch the news at all, whereas primary school aged kids might enjoy watching a program like BTN behind the news rather than you know, watching the adult news, which oftentimes just is not age appropriate. Teens are more likely to enjoy watching the adult news and understanding what's going on and why, but they probably would benefit from having an adult help interpret it for them. And the article also says that the impact of large-scale societal challenges is lower where children have loving caregivers. So this goes back to the connection conversation we were just having. And it also says that the impact is lower where children have calm caregivers. So this is another reason that self-care is so important. It's that sense that, not that any of us are flying at the moment, and hopefully we can remember what it was like to get on a plane. But it's like, you know, putting your oxygen mask on first. You need to be calm, speak with your children calmly about what's happening and in a loving way, and that's going to reduce the impact on them. And something else, interestingly, that this article talked about is this sense of being connected to something bigger than them, whatever form this might take. Now, I'm not saying that we all need to suddenly go out and start becoming religious. Some of you will be, which is great. It can mean religion. But there are plenty of other ways of connecting to things that are greater than us. And it can be something as simple as connecting with the broader community, or having more of a spiritual outlook. So I know that there were some great stories going around of kids, you know, baking cupcakes for their neighbours when they were in lockdown, or, you know, drawing pictures and sending them off to the local elderly carers home to boost their spirits, which is really beautiful. So the last thing I really wanted to talk about before opening up for some questions is fear, worry, and anxiousness or anxiety, because I think fear is an emotion that underpins a lot of the worry that working parents have right now. And really, all the examples I gave at the beginning, so returning to work, job insecurity, job loss, staying strong during a job search, worrying about our kids, worrying about our elderly parents. Are we going to get sick? Are we going to get to work on time? Are we going to get sick by getting the bus to work? Whatever it is, fear probably is underpinning it. And look, fear can take many forms, and it can be disruptive and terrifying. It's innate and hardwired, and it's automatically and unconsciously triggered by our brain in response to a threat. It's like our internal alarm system. So fear is designed to keep us alive. It's how we react to anything that threatens our survival. So when we feel threatened, our brain triggers the fight or flight response. And at Resilience in Kids, we actually talk about making friends with our fears. Our kind of the language around fear is very much, oh, you got to face your fears, you got to step up to your fears, you got to confront your fears. Well, actually, if it's here to help us, then let's just make friends with our fear. I tell you what, as a caveman in caveman days, I would much rather know that rustle. I'd much rather assume that rustle in the bushes was a saber-toothed tiger than a nice fluffy little bunny rabbit. So our emotions how we feel physically, our thoughts and our behaviours are all connected. So when we experience fear, it can lead to physical symptoms such as, you know, the sweaty palms that we're probably all familiar with, a pounding heart, butterflies, upset stomach, a tight chest, and all of this can lead us to having thoughts such that, you know what, I'm not going to apply for that job. I know I won't get it, which can then lead to behaviours such as avoidance or, you know, busyness or the numbing that I talked about before. And fear often disguises itself as other emotions, so maybe anger or personality traits such as arrogance or perfectionism are often fear-based, and it can lead to worry and anxiousness or anxiety. And this is all really powerful stuff, again, for us to be explaining to our kids. So much of the power of fear can be taken away from a situation when a child understands that actually it's just an almond-shaped part of the brain called the amygdala that's sending a fear response that's causing our heart to beat faster, which is making our palms feel a little bit sweaty, and that it's all actually very normal and very natural. But here's the thing, the internal alarm system doesn't just go off when our survival is at risk, it also goes off when there's absolutely nothing to be afraid of. So it responds to real and perceived threats in exactly the same way. And, you know, there's no doubt that some things are fearful, and it's wholly appropriate for the fight or flight response to be triggered. So I don't know if any of you were at the beach on the weekend, but there was a massive swell, 10-meter waves. They were enormous. So going surfing in that probably wasn't a great idea, and to be fair, there was nobody surfing at all. But others aren't. And sometimes our brain is unable to discern between the two. So maybe we received a curt email from our boss. We might deep down be afraid of losing our job. And so we immediately jump to, well, that's it. I'm next on the chopping block. He wants to meet with me to, yeah, he sent me that email because he's decided I'm next to go. Now, worry is a response to an unknown or kind of imprecise or poorly defined threat. It's often anticipatory and created in our imagination, and that's what creates these feelings and emotions of kind of anxiousness. And they're kind of both the same thing, anxiousness and anxiety, ongoing states, with anxiety being the mental health condition. Now, we've talked about a whole bunch of tools and techniques for managing stress and overwhelm. All of these can help us cope with fear. Another really great tool is reframing. So when we identify a situation that we're afraid of, we can make the decision to be brave anyway. So being afraid and brave aren't really mutually exclusive. Thinking more realistically about our worries is another way in which we can lessen the grip they have on us. Now, to do this, we need to be able to identify what our worries are, and practicing mindfulness is a really great way of doing this. But once we've identified what they are, we can try and think more realistically about them. Is what we're worried about likely? What evidence is there? Is the evidence factual, or is it a hunch? What would our best friend say to us in this situation? Has this happened to us before? Or something else that could be happening? For example, your boss organises a meeting with you and you decide this is because she wants to make you redundant. You can't focus and you're losing sleep. So thinking more realistically about the situation might involve you realising there's actually no evidence for this. She might actually want to speak with you about the latest project you've taken on. And actually, she often organises impromptu meetings with you without explaining what they're about. So really, it's quite normal. And this is a great and exceptionally powerful tool to use with your kids as well. And you can do it with them, you know, sometimes they'll experience worries before bed. You can do this with them before bed, and the more your kids start practicing this themselves, the more they'll be able to just practice it without you necessarily being there. So a great example of this is maybe your child's worried about a burglar breaking into the house and stealing things while you're all asleep. So you can, you know, you can ask them, well, you know, how many times has this happened before? Oh, it's not actually ever happened before. Is it likely to happen in that case? And you can kind of get quite mathematical with them. So you're 10, you've had 365 nights sleep every year. It's never happened before. Well, actually, there's a 0% or 0.0001% likelihood of it happening what would a friend say to you? Or a friend would say, oh, just go to sleep and stop worrying. What's something else that could happen? Or well, actually, something else that might happen is that the cat might jump on the bed in the night and wake you up. And then it really takes the power out of the situation. Thinking about what you can control or influence about a situation is also a powerful way of helping us cope with fear. So maybe we're worried, that our partner will lose their job, putting pressure on you and your family financially. You really can't control anything about that situation. You can maybe influence how your partner responds. You can maybe talk to them about possibly coming up with a plan B, as I suggested earlier, but at the end of the day, the situation is out of your control, in which case there's really no point in worrying about it. And a great technique for still being able to focus when feeling worried is to write your worries down, or to practice a visualization. So a couple of great tools that we talk to people about is putting all your worries, and this is great when you've got a really busy mind as well, is to put all your worries and busy thoughts into a hot air balloon, and to visualize that hot air balloon floating up into the top right-hand corner of your mind. And then when you've finished focusing or doing whatever it is that you need to do, they can all come back down again when you've finished what it is that you're doing. Or you can close your eyes briefly and imagine that you're sitting by a stream, watching leaves go by, and you can put each of your worries or each of your thoughts on a leaf and watch that leaf float away. And these are really great tools with your children. And another lovely tool to do with your kids is to create a worry box. So we already talked about the self-care box, but the worry box is really beautiful, and it can be a really fun craft activity for them. They can either make a box from scratch, or they can decorate a shoebox. So the idea is they write their worries down and they put them in the box. And once the lid is closed, they can no longer worry about them. The next day, say you've gone through this process with them before bed, you can then open the box and you can talk through the worries that they've written down. And often the worries that they had will have completely gone away, and you can create a really beautiful ritual around ripping them up and throwing them into the rubbish. And there's a really great book on managing anxiety in kids, which I'll make sure a link is sent around to afterwards. So I'm conscious of the time and the fact that we need to leave a bit of question at the end for questions and answers. I also wanted to take a minute or two before we wrap up the Q&A, just to share some further information about the follow-up webinar series that I mentioned at the start of the webinar, and to encourage you to book in for this either now or after the session. Just a reminder that the link is in the chat function. So I'll be going into what I've spoken about this evening in more detail, but I'll also be covering a whole bunch of new content. It will all be really practical, and it will relate to what you as working parents are currently experiencing. So we'll be talking about fear, worry and anxiety in a bit more detail, and sharing more practical ideas for how we can be brave in the face of fear. We'll be talking about unhelpful thought patterns and exploring how we can change them, exploring emotions and how we can better manage them, looking at how we can create and maintain strong networks and really strong relationships in those networks, how we can build our confidence and sense of self-worth, how we can better embrace change, become more creative, flexible and adaptable, which within that resilience framework is probably the #1 thing to develop right now. This whole set, I mean, how adaptable have we all needed to be since COVID hit? I'll be busting the perfect parent myth, suggesting ways of managing the juggle, the mental load, parental guilt, how we can be more vulnerable, be more positive, and lots. Yeah, the team, if you've missed the chat function, the team at FlexCareers will also be sending a link to book in their follow-up email. So thank you very much for your time. I think I've been talking for just over 50 minutes now. It's great to see so many of you on the call. I'd like to open up for some questions. What questions do you have? We've got quite a few questions coming through, but before we jump in, sort of very quick thanks to Susie. So I've actually got a question here that I'll read out on behalf of Deborah. She
writes, unfortunately, my son's been struggling to get through double maths and physics through this troubling time. He hasn't been coping with his maths for the first time during his long school experience. How will universities consider these kids that have studied Year 12 throughout these difficult times? And will there be flexibility because of the additional hurdles they've had to jump? Very much a Year 12 focused question. Susie?
Yeah, absolutely. And these are real concerns. These are real worries that Year 12 kids and their parents have got. And as I said before, the story is still being written, but I can't imagine that there would be a situation whereby the kids from 2020 wouldn't be considered in a different light. Obviously, I don't know for sure, but I can't imagine there'd be a situation where they wouldn't be considered in a different light because of the fact that they've had to spend all of this time, you know, learning from home with the support of their parents. But crikey, I mean, my kids are in primary school and I can't support them with their maths, so I really can't imagine how you could support a Year 12 child with double maths and physics. I guess the only advice I would have, other than to maybe speak to the universities that he or she is, I can't remember if it was a he or a she, but a son, sorry, that your son is thinking of going to, you know, speaking with them, but just staying connected with his teachers and trying to work out ways of him trying to catch up as quickly as possible. And let's not forget that teachers and schools, I mean, these are deeply experienced professionals, right, who are able to hopefully pick the kids up in whatever state they come back in, and you know, help them reach that point that they would have reached before. And then I guess it's really, if it was me, I'd just be trying to up the ante on the organisational skills, making sure that, you know, he's got a good study environment, he's getting enough sleep, so everything that can set him up for success as he navigates this highly challenging period, that they're all in place.
Yeah, it'll be tough.
Really
now,
tough.
I've got another question here from Alison. She speaks about growth mindset and resilience. And how does growth mindset play into resilience? She says that she's been trying to build a growth mindset in her daughters. Talk us through that.
Yeah, growth mindset is just so interesting. And for those who aren't aware of Carol Dweck's work, now this, I don't think he's in the email, but yeah, she's called Carol Dweck. She's written this book called Mindset, and she basically talks about people having either a growth mindset or a fixed mindset. And when you read the book, you kind of go, oh my goodness, this is so basic, this is so obvious, but it's actually really quite groundbreaking. And again, I talked a lot about fear. There's a lot of fear underpinning why we can't just switch from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. Basically, people with a fixed mindset tend to believe that they're talented or that they're gifted at something, and they might try and spend their time proving that rather than putting in the hard work and effort to improve. Whereas someone with a growth mindset believes that they're, and this is really all the research that she did, but basically believes that their potential is unknown and unknowable. And this is really exciting stuff, because, you know, for us as, you know, fully grown adults, imagine our potential is unknown and unknowable still, because who knows what we could achieve through hard work and effort. So the growth mindset is, you know, front and central to resilience. And we talk a lot with kids about this, and it's really as simple as oftentimes just using the power of yet. So she talks a lot about the power of yet. And you'll get kids say, oh, I can't do a cartwheel, or I can't do my double maths. And you just sort of reframe it and say, we can't do it yet. But through hard work and effort, you might be able to do it, or you'll most likely be able to do it, you know, much better than you could before. Now, that's not to say that some kids don't naturally find it easier than others at doing certain things. For sure, they absolutely do. But anybody can get better at things if they put in that hard work and effort. So just, you know, incorporating the word yet into your day-to-day conversations is really important. Avoiding labeling your kids is a really great way of building their resilience with a growth mindset lens. So, you know, often you'll have siblings and you'll be like, oh yeah, he's the maths one, she's the sporty one. That just puts them in a box. And when you're in a box, you know, it's very hard to then get out of that box, and you sort of spend your time then having to prove that you're the best at maths or that you're the best at swimming. doesn't really encourage you to want to keep trying and pushing. We've even got, I think, perseverance as you know, one of the headings in our resilience framework for kids, and this is just as relevant for us, that's this sense of persevering. And if you read her book, she's also got a lot of stuff in there around praise versus encouragement. So the third thing, so the yet, I can't remember the second one, I just mentioned it, but the third thing is praise and encouragement. So rather than, you know, good boy or well done, which is just a bit sort of empty and vague, is to try and encourage children and praise them for the hard work and effort they've put in. So rather than, wow, what a great piece of artwork, it's, I can see that there's some new shapes there and that you've experimented with some different brush strokes. And I can see you've used some new colours to really encourage them and encourage the effort, I guess, recognise the effort that they've put in. I hope that answers your question. It's really interesting work. She's got some great TED Talks as well for those who would rather something shorter and sharper than a book.
I've watched the TED Talks. They're very, very, very good. Last
great,
question here. Yeah, no, they're brilliant. Last question here, only in the interest of time. Stephen asks, he has strategies for kids where the other kids at school are talking negatively, and how does that play into resilience? Other kids at school are talking negative.
So the other kids are talking negatively. Sounds
other
like they
kids
need
at school,
resilience coaching.
Yeah, he said, yeah, the other kids at school are talking negatively. It might even be bullying. So how?
Yeah, it's a really tricky one. So I guess it would be keeping the lines of communication open to ascertain whether it is a bullying situation. I mean, there's different types of unkind behaviour. There's, you know, full-on bullying, which is repeated. Unkind behaviour is ongoing and sustained. I do find the word bullying is often overused at the moment because there is also just unkind behaviour, which is sort of one-off and irregular. And then there's a sort of a friendship blow up. So that's where you have a good friendship with somebody, but you just kind of have a falling out with them. So it's good to kind of ascertain which one of those things it is. It's very easy as a parent to want to just jump in and try and fix everything, but I try and take the view it's important to try and, unless it's bullying, in which case of course you need to get the school involved, but if it's not, it's about trying to skill your child up so that they can stand up for themselves. There's great social and emotional learning from this kind of thing, which is very difficult for a parent to do. But building up that sense of self-worth, which is a webinar in itself, but things like giving them independence, you know, giving them responsibility within the home, developing that growth mindset. I mean, there's a whole raft of things that you can do to build up their self-worth so that they realise that they're not defined by what other people think of them. Actually, it doesn't matter. If someone says something unkind to them, they can just kind of let it water off a duck's back, as it were. I mean, I'm conscious of the time, it's quite a brief answer, but yeah, it's really difficult as a parent to watch that, and it's really difficult as a child to experience it. We should never underestimate the impact that it can have on these poor little chickens. It's really quite upsetting. Yep. And it sounds like those other kids need a bit of resilience coaching.
All right, well, thank you very much. Let's end it there. My name's Joel McInnes from FlexCareers. This is Susie Mogg, the CEO of Resilience in Kids. We've really appreciated everyone's time this evening. I know it's tough to come on one of these things once the kids are in bed and all that kind of stuff, but we really do appreciate it, and we hope that everyone got some value out of the session. If you want to learn more from Susie, I would very much encourage everyone to check out the follow-on webinar series that Susie will be running. But other than that, thank you very much. Susie, any last words from you?
No, just thank you again. It was a pleasure speaking with you all, and I am first and foremost a member of the community, so if there's anything I can do to help and support through this difficult time, do feel free to reach out. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone, and we'll see you later.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.